Greetings from Columbus, Ohio. I am honored to be addressing the last Rocket Man LaunchPad for 2023. Can you hardly believe it? My name is Dan Snelson, and I am a senior system engineer with the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. We are sometimes called Mormons because of our belief in a volume of companion scripture to the Holy Bible called the Book of Mormon. Let's talk about using Set Up Your Mac Helper to jumpstart your user's onboarding experience. Here is our agenda. We'll first level set by talking about Swift Dialog, Set Up Your Mac, and Set Up Your Mac Helper. We'll spend the bulk of our time together demonstrating how Set Up Your Mac Helper can jumpstart your user's onboarding experience. I'll then highlight areas where you should expect to hand code to apply your organization's specific racing stripes. We'll finish up with how you can contribute, where you can find support, and I'll try to answer any questions. Additionally, at the end of many slides, I'll pause for questions about that slide, so you don't have to try to remember your questions through the entire process. Please enter your questions in the chat, and someone will read them for the entire audience. So, sound good? Let's continue. First, let's level set with a few about slides. None of this would be possible without BART and Swift Dialog. BART has provided the Mac admin community Swift Dialog, an open source utility written in Swift UI, which requires macOS Monterey 12 or later that displays a pop-up dialog which can include content-rich messages for your end users. While BART is fond of saying that Swift Dialog itself has no brains, Swift Dialog can return various values from user input on which your script can act and continue processing. The project is available on GitHub, and BART has an extensive wiki with detailed examples. Additionally, there's built-in help when you need a quick answer. Here's a QR code for BART's JNUC session from last year. Are there any general questions about Swift Dialog? Well, Set Up Your Mac is a 3,000 plus line bash script, which was originally inspired by Adam's code and then James's code on which it still relies. Some recent heavy lifting has been provided by Bart himself, for which I'm personally grateful. The latest blog post can always be found at the displayed URL or the QR code, and is probably the best place to get started. Let's look at a demo. Here's a demo of automated device enrollment and Set Up Your Mac being executed via self-service, which we call the Workforce App Store. While we prompt users to initiate Set Up Your Mac via self-service, you can have Set Up Your Mac execute automatically immediately after enrollment. The blog post referenced earlier includes a link to Rob's site where you could learn how to leverage a pre-stage enrollment package. Set Up Your Mac Helper makes it a breeze to customize which fields initially display, so you can prompt your users for the exact information dictated by your business requirements. Users are presented with an estimated duration of the entire process based on their current internet connection. and users can see detailed information on the progress of application installations, including if there are any failures. Are there any general questions about Set Up Your Mac?
Hi, Dan. I've got a question.
Please.
You had in the previous screen about 30 seconds ago, you had three items there. There was the installation type was required, and then two other options. Does that just allow you to configure additional applications to be installed beyond what is required by the organization?
Correct. We call those configurations, and the names that I came up with are required, recommended, and complete. Well, Leslie has outdone himself yet again with Set Up Your Mac Helper. Set Up Your Mac Helper is a standalone macOS app which makes the always tedious work of building your custom policy JSON an absolute delight. But Leslie didn't stop there. Many variables, but not all, can be modified or toggled in Set Up Your Mac Helper. My site is probably the best place to get started with Set Up Your Mac Helper. Let's look at a number of demos for jump-starting your user's onboarding experience with Set Up Your Mac Helper. Now for the fun part. But, as always, before we can have any fun, we need to do a little work. Each Jamf Pro policy you wish to execute with Set Up Your Mac needs to first have a custom trigger. Take some time on a naming convention and use it consistently. Whomever follows you when you land your next big gig will be glad that you did. Next, please be aware that Set Up Your Mac Helper leverages a few fields from a policy's self-service tab, even if the policy is disabled from being displayed in self-service. Finally, my personal recommendation is that you have dedicated enrollment policies. A number of Mac admins have recently reported issues with their customized Set Up Your Mac script going sideways, and the root cause was too many racing stripes in the policies being executed by Set Up Your Mac. Any questions about the pre-work you'll have to do before launching Set Up Your Mac Helper for the first time? As just one example of how Leslie outdid himself with Set Up Your Mac Helper, one of my favorite features is the ability to specify a script source. Let's take a look at a demo. We'll launch Set Up Your Mac Helper and log in. We'll click the settings icon in the bottom left-hand corner to quickly access the default source, which is the main branch. Let's select a different branch, in this case 1.13.0. So we'll change main to 1.13.0. So that was a demo of specifying your own script source in Set Up Your Mac Helper. If you have your own fork of Set Up Your Mac, you may wish to try specifying it in Set Up Your Mac Helper. And note, this screencast is already outdated. The main branch is now version 1.13.0, but there is a 1.13.1 branch available if you'd like to test this feature for yourself. Any questions about script source and Set Up Your Mac Helper? So why would you change the script source? So let's say you forked my repo and you have made your own changes, but you still want to leverage Set Up Your Mac Helper. Or you want to test a development build. So for example, my main branch right now is 113.0, but 113.1 is available. And so you could run it against that. Let's quickly review the remaining settings. We'll launch Set Up Your Mac Helper. We'll log in. We'll click the settings icon in the bottom left-hand corner. Populating your customized list of buildings and departments is just a click away. Let's look at a demo of building a default configuration, which is required before being able to generate a customized Set Up Your Mac script. We'll launch Set Up Your Mac Helper. And we'll log in. We've already completed our Jamf Pro policy pre-work and have dedicated enrollment policies, so let's filter on enrollment. We can easily add policies from the left column to the selected configuration by double-clicking. We can click the plus button to add a validation. Multiple triggers can be displayed to the user as a single item by first selecting them, then clicking Group. Next, we'll add a local validation for File Vault, which is built in to Set Up Your Mac. We'll continue adding policies from the list on the left by double-clicking. When you use the so-called file path validation, you can use the Select button to navigate in the file system for the desired app. Then manually enter /contents/info.plist. So here we'll grab Global Protect and then we'll manually enter contents and info.plist. You'll always want to end with a local validation of recon and also specify the command of recon to update your Jamf Pro server for the newly enrolled Mac. We'll save the file to the desktop and we'll open it up in Visual Studio Code. We'll get our windows arranged. Then we're going to search for policy JSON equals. You'll notice the validations that we manually entered are missing data for list item, icon, and progress text. In a previously elevated terminal window, let's execute the script as is. The so-called welcome screen looks good. And here we see the missing information from our policy JSON. On the left, we have a sample policy JSON from the GitHub repo, which we'll use to copy pasta the missing information in our customized setup your Mac script. We'll save this out. I don't want to continue filling out all these fields for the rest of the demos. Let's return to set up your Mac helper and turn most of those off. We'll go to settings, prompt for. We'll toggle off most of these prompts. And then we'll click generate script to replace our previous script. If you look at the VS Code window in the background, you'll see the changes we manually made are blown away when we regenerated the script and set up your Mac helper. We'll re-copy pasta. Save. And rerun the script. Hey, now we only have to enter the asset tag. Oh, nice. Everything's showing up. So any questions about defining your default configuration and set up your Mac helper?
One thing I've been chatting with someone with Tony in the chat about is whether or not this can support app installers, since there's no real, it's not a policy, so we don't know when they're going to install.
So the answer is no, and I'll put a link here in the chat. And then somebody asked about grouping. So the purpose of grouping is to present a single item to the end user, but you're running multiple policies at once. So for example, we have our final configuration does many things that we don't want end users to see, but we just call it final configuration. So that's why you would group things. And I just put in the chat the open feature request about app catalog inserts. Some of us are hosted on-prem and don't have the option to leverage those. Okay, I'll move on, but we can still have other questions. So let's look at a demo of building the so-called complete configuration. So we'll set up your Mac helper and log in. Our previous work on the default configuration is here, so let's use it to build what we refer to as our complete configuration. But before we do, let's look up the variable name for the third configuration. Okay, here's the snippet of code which displays the various configuration names based on the variable values. You'll make it easy on yourself if you use these exact variable names when naming your configurations and set up your Mac helper. And once again, we'll add policies from the left column to our complete configuration by double-clicking. And then policy order can be changed by drag and drop. A pro tip, I found it easiest to build and test my customized Setup Your Mac script by running Setup Your Mac Helper on an enrolled, fully configured Mac. And here for Office, I'm just arbitrarily picking Outlook. But then we're going to leverage a remote validation for the whole suite. All right, let's generate the script. Okay, then we've got our new items, and you'll notice the items we have for local validations aren't there. So any questions about defining your complete configuration? Let's look at building the two remaining configurations. We'll launch Setup Your Mac Helper. And we'll log in. Our previous work on the so-called complete configuration is already selected, so let's use it to build what we refer to as our recommended configuration. But before we do, let's grab this variable name. And this time we're going to remove policies from the right column by double-clicking. And let's build our last configuration, but this time we'll clone the default. We'll generate the script. Let's just run it as is here. This time we'll choose recommended. So we still have these missing local validations, so let's go fix those. Everything else looks good. So we'll search again for policy JSON equals. And then we'll update this information. Okay, let's test this out with just getting the last policy fixed for the recon. We'll do complete this time. Okay, so we've got our last one fixed. We just need to fix the file vault. Okay, last paste here. Let's save this out. You recommended this time. Hey, that looks good. So any questions about defining our last two configurations and set up your Mac helper? Now for the detail work. While the current version of Set Up Your Mac Helper handles much of the heavy lifting, it hasn't yet replaced your preferred code editor. Specifically, when testing locally via terminal, you'll need to manually change the defaults for the various script parameters like debug mode. New in version 1.13.0 is the Armin-inspired Set Up Your Mac Helper comment, which will hopefully tell you which settings you can and can't yet modify and set up your Mac helper. Hopefully it was clear from the earlier demos that for local validations, you'll need to manually update the missing data each time you generate a fresh script from Set Up Your Mac Helper. And last on this list, which is by no means comprehensive, is configuration variables. Unless you like the three names we're using, you'll want to make some modifications here too. Any questions on hand coding requirements? Well, each of you is invited to contribute. We have an incredible list of contributors. The Mac Admin Slack has a dedicated channel for conversations and best effort support of Mac admins leveraging Set Up Your Mac. If it's okay, I'd like to ask the first question. How does Set Up Your Mac compare to Jamf Pro's new macOS onboarding? Let's look at several features of both Set Up Your Mac and macOS onboarding. Distribution and support are probably the key differences. And for some of you, that's where this comparison ends. I get it. Your organization requires commercially produced, vendor-supported solutions. For the rest of us, please be aware that macOS onboarding was introduced in Jamf Pro 11.1. So if you're running an earlier version, you'll need to first upgrade. If features like a branded, customizable interface, full screen experience, or capturing user input are important to your workflow, you may wish to open a feature request with Jamf Pro. You'll want to carefully review Jamf's documentation about which computers will be affected. Likewise, about your options to initiate the workflow and which policies can be included. And here's a biggie. You may not want to spend your time hand coding, and you may not even have a preferred code editor. I also get that. Last, but certainly not least, is the engine on which these two options run. I'm happy to answer any questions about Set Up Your Mac features, and will refer you to Jamf's documentation or your Jamf contacts for questions about macOS onboarding. So here we can open it up to questions.
I had one. I put this in the meeting chat, but you probably just didn't see it. But about a custom branding banner. I got that working. I had actually deployed a local one, but I don't really want to do that. So what's the best way to get that, to actually have a customized branding banner?
So we leverage our self-service branding. So we already have customized banners and self-service, and we just grab the URL, and that's what we use.
Yeah, I did try that and it worked. I just wasn't satisfied with that solution. So
then you may need to deploy something client side. If you're not, if you're not happy with something web hosted, you'll have to deploy it client side.
Okay.
Great question.
Hey, Dan, I just want to mention now that we're at the top of the hour, people are going to start dropping off most likely. Amazing presentation. Thank you so much.